On the night of the blood moon, the entire Silverfong pack gathered beneath a sky stained deep crimson to witness what was meant to be a sacred union. The blood moon ceremony was rare and powerful, believed to strengthen mate bonds blessed by the moon goddess herself. For most wolves, it was a night of celebration. For me, it became the night everything changed. I stood at the center of the ceremonial grounds wearing a white gown chosen by the elders, my hands trembling despite my effort to remain steady. From the moment I turned 18, I had felt the mate bond hum quietly inside my chest whenever Alpha Kale was near. It was never overwhelming, but it was constant and undeniable. He was my mate, and my wolf had recognized him long before I dared to admit it aloud. An alpha who finds his mate is expected to claim her publicly during the blood moon ceremony. That claim makes her Luna second in power only to him. It is not just tradition, it is law within most packs. So when the drums began and I stepped forward, I believed that no matter how distant Kale had always seemed, the bond would guide him to choose me. I was wrong. Chapter 1. The Night of Rejection. The ceremonial grounds were lit by tall torches that flickered in the cool night air, casting long shadows across the gathered warriors and elders. Alpha Kale sat on the carved stone seat reserved for the ruling alpha, his black ceremonial armor reflecting the red glow of the moon above us. He looked every part the leader, strong, controlled, unshaken. When my name was called, I stepped forward into the circle. My voice trembled at first, but I forced it to steady as I spoke the formal words. I accepted the mate bond before the pack, declaring my willingness to stand beside him as his Luna. A quiet murmur passed through the crowd. Some already assumed he would accept. Others watched with curiosity. Kale rose from his seat and walked toward me with slow, measured steps. As he approached, the bond between us reacted instantly. Heat spread across my chest, and my wolf stirred with hopeful anticipation. For a brief moment, I saw hesitation in his eyes. It lasted only seconds before his expression hardened. In a clear, unwavering voice that carried across the grounds, he formally rejected me. The words struck with a force I had not prepared for. The sacred thread connecting us tightened painfully and then began to tear. It felt as if something inside my chest was being ripped apart, leaving raw emptiness in its place. I dropped to my knees as the pain overwhelmed me, my wolf howling in distress within my mind. The pack did not intervene. Some watched in silence. Others whispered. Rejection at a blood moon ceremony was rare and deeply humiliating. An Omega rejected publicly by her Alpha was left without status or protection. Kale did not stop there. He declared before everyone that Silverfong required strength in its Luna, not weakness. He did not shout or insult me directly, but the implication was clear. In his eyes, I was not fit to stand beside him. When he turned away, the ceremony ended as abruptly as it had begun. One by one, the pack members dispersed, leaving me alone on the cold earth beneath the crimson sky. I believed the worst of the night had already happened. I did not yet understand that it was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Mark Awakens. The pain from the rejection did not fade the way the elders once described. Instead of dull emptiness, a strange warmth began spreading from the center of my chest outward. At first, I assumed it was simply the bond finishing its severing, but the sensation grew stronger rather than weaker. I tried to stand, but my legs trembled. The air around me felt charged, almost heavy, as if the forest itself had grown aware of something shifting. The red light of the blood moon seemed brighter now, focused rather than distant. Then the warmth turned into heat. It spread along my collarbone and down my shoulder, sharp enough to force a cry from my throat. I pressed my hand against the burning skin, only to feel raised lines forming beneath my fingertips. The fabric of my gown tore slightly as a faint silver glow emerged from beneath it. The mark appeared slowly, not carved by any physical blade, but etched into my skin as if guided by unseen hands. It traced a curved symbol that shimmered with both silver and faint crimson light. The pain was intense, yet beneath it was something steadier, something powerful. At the same time my wolf changed. The weakness that had defined me for so long vanished. The fragile, submissive presence I had grown used to was replaced by something alert and commanding. I felt taller inside my own body, as though a hidden layer of myself had been unlocked. Far from the ceremonial grounds, Alpha Kale felt it too. The bond he believed he had severed did not disappear entirely. Instead, it shifted into something unfamiliar, something that made his wolf restless. The surge of power that rippled through the territory was subtle but undeniable, causing several warriors to pause and glance toward the forest. Back where I stood, the burning gradually subsided, leaving the mark glowing faintly against my skin. I lifted my head and realized that the tears had stopped. The humiliation, the heartbreak, the crushing weight of rejection had not vanished completely, but they no longer defined the moment. An understanding settled quietly within me. I had not been marked as punishment. I had been marked for something greater. The blood moon above no longer felt like a witness to my humiliation. Felt like a signal. And somewhere deep within my instincts, I sensed that Silverfong was not the place I was destined to remain. The night that was meant to end me had awakened something ancient instead. Chapter 3. Exiled Before Dawn. By the time the glow of the mark faded into a steady shimmer beneath my skin, the forest around the ceremonial grounds had grown quiet again. The torches were nearly burned out, and the last of the pack members who had lingered to whisper about my rejection were finally making their way back toward the main settlement. I remained standing at the edge of the clearing, aware that something irreversible had shifted inside me. I did not have to wait long before I sensed their return. The warriors approached first, cautious and alert, forming a loose semicircle as if I had suddenly become unpredictable. Their expressions were no longer mocking. They were uncertain. Behind them walked the elders, their robes brushing against the ground, their faces tight with restrained concern. Alpha Kale came last. He did not rush. He never rushed. His steps were controlled, deliberate, and every wolf instinctively moved aside to give him space. When his gaze settled on me, it was no longer indifferent. He was studying me now, measuring something he could not fully understand. The eldest council member spoke before Kale did. He said the surge of power that passed through the territory moments ago had been felt as far as the northern watch posts. He said ancient records mentioned rare wolves marked by the blood moon, and that such awakenings were often followed by instability. His voice carried the careful tone of someone presenting concern rather than accusation, but the direction of his words was clear. I was a risk. Kale's eyes shifted briefly to the faint silver symbol still visible at the edge of my torn gown. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He could feel it too, the difference. Whatever had awakened inside me did not bow automatically to his alpha presence the way it once had. For years I had lowered my gaze without thinking. I had stepped aside when higher-ranking wolves passed. I had made myself smaller to survive. Now I remained standing. Not in defiance. Simply because kneeling did not feel natural anymore. The silence stretched between us before Kale finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and authoritative as he declared that Silverfong Pack could not harbor unknown power within its borders. Until the nature of the blood mark was understood, the safety of the pack came first. I would leave before sunrise. The words were delivered formally without cruelty, but the meaning was absolute. Exile. No escort. No protection. Once I crossed the boundary stones, I would no longer belong to Silverfong. A few warriors shifted uncomfortably. Even rejection did not usually lead to immediate banishment. But no one challenged the decision. An alpha's ruling during a blood moon carried even greater weight. Kale stepped closer then, lowering his voice so only I could hear. He said the world beyond the territory was not merciful, especially to a lone wolf, and that whatever strength I believed had awakened would not shield me from rogues or rival packs. His tone was firm, but beneath it was something else. Perhaps doubt, perhaps frustration that events had slipped beyond his control. I met his eyes steadily. I never asked to be weak, I said quietly. You just decided I was. The statement was not meant as an attack. It was simply truth. For a moment, something flickered across his expression, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. He straightened and stepped back, restoring distance between us. The formal dismissal followed shortly after. By dawn I was to be gone. As the warriors dispersed again, I turned toward the forest that bordered the pack's territory. I felt no dramatic surge of fear, only a growing awareness that the path ahead had already begun unfolding. The mark beneath my skin pulsed faintly, not painfully now, but steadily, like a quiet reminder that I was no longer the same wolf who had walked into the ceremony hours earlier. When I crossed the boundary stones just before sunrise, the air shifted subtly. The scent of Silverfong territory faded behind me, replaced by the untamed wild beyond. I paused only once, not to look back at the pack, but to feel the final thread of connection loosen. The rejection had broken one bond. The mark had awakened another. And though I did not yet know where it would lead, I understood one thing clearly as the first light of dawn touched the forest. Exile was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of it. Chapter 4. Beyond the Boundary. The forest beyond Silverfong territory was denser than I remembered. As a child, we had been warned never to cross the boundary stones without permission, told that rogues and hostile packs roamed freely beyond our borders. Now, as I moved deeper between towering trees and thick undergrowth, I realized how much of that fear had been shaped by ignorance rather than experience. The wilderness did not feel hostile. It felt watchful. The mark beneath my skin remained faintly warm, not painful but present, as though guiding my direction. I followed no clear trail at first, simply moving forward, allowing instinct to lead me. My wolf was unusually calm, not anxious or defensive. Instead, it seemed alert in a focused way I had never experienced before. Hours passed. The sun rose fully, filtering gold light through the canopy above. Hunger and exhaustion began to settle into my muscles, reminding me that exile did not erase physical limits. I had no supplies, no allies, and no clear destination. That was when I sensed them. It began as a subtle shift in the air, a change in scent carried by the wind. Not rogues. Not Silverfong. The presence was organized, controlled, and strong. My wolf did not retreat. It stood taller. I slowed my steps, aware that I was no longer alone. 3 figures emerged from between the trees ahead of me. They moved with quiet coordination, spreading slightly apart but not in an aggressive formation. Their clothing was darker, less ceremonial than Silverfong attire, designed for movement rather than display. Each of them carried the unmistakable scent of a pack, but it was not one I recognized. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward. His posture was steady, confident without unnecessary dominance. His eyes assessed me carefully, but there was no mockery in them. "You crossed Silverfang's boundary at dawn," he said evenly. "Alone." It was not a question. "I was exiled," I replied, keeping my voice level. His gaze shifted briefly to the faint outline of the mark visible at my collarbone. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. Recognition. "So it has finally awakened," he murmured, more to himself than to me. The other 2 exchanged a look. Not surprise but in confirmation. A quiet realization settled over me. These wolves had not stumbled across me by accident. They had been aware of the surge that rippled through the territory the night before. They had felt it. "You know what this is," I said. The tall warrior held my gaze for a long moment before answering. "We know enough." He introduced their pack as one that did not align itself under the traditional council structure that governed territories like Silverfong. They lived beyond mapped borders, away from alpha politics and rigid hierarchies. Their existence was not secret, but it was not widely acknowledged either. "The blood mark does not appear randomly," he continued. "It responds to specific bloodlines, specific events. My pulse quickened slightly, though I forced myself to remain composed. And what does it mean? It means Silverfong never understood what it had, he said simply. There was no insult in his tone. Just fact. The two wolves behind him relaxed slightly, though they remained observant. I realized then that they were not assessing whether I was a threat. They were evaluating something else entirely. Potential. The tall warrior stepped aside slightly, creating a clear path between us rather than blocking my way. You can continue wandering alone, he said, and learn through trial and danger what that mark makes you. Or you can come with us and understand it properly. There was no coercion in his offer. No alpha pressure. Just a choice. For the first time since the ceremony, I felt the direction of my future resting fully in my own hands. Silverfong had defined me by rank and weakness. The blood mark had already proven that definition incomplete. Where would we go? I asked. To a place that remembers what the blood moon once meant, he replied. The forest seemed to grow quieter as I considered his words. My instincts were not warning me to flee. If anything, they were urging me forward. I took a step toward them. Not as a rejected omega. Not as a cast-out mate. But as something still unfolding. And as we began walking deeper into the wilderness together, I sensed that Silverfang's story was no longer the center of mine. Chapter 5. The Pack That Remembers. We walked for most of the day without unnecessary conversation. The three wolves moved efficiently through the forest, adjusting their pace to match mine without comment. It was not until late afternoon that the trees began to thin, revealing elevated terrain ahead. Stone outcroppings rose from the earth in natural formations, and beyond them, I sensed a concentrated presence, stronger than a scouting unit, quieter than a territory patrol. As we approached, I realized we were not heading toward a scattered rogue camp, but toward an established settlement carefully concealed within the landscape itself. Structures built from timber and reinforced stone blended into the cliffs, positioned strategically rather than symbolically. There was no throne platform, no ceremonial display. The design suggested function over hierarchy. Several wolves observed our arrival from elevated positions, but no one rushed forward in alarm. Their discipline was evident in the way they watched without reacting impulsively. This was not a pack driven by spectacle. The tall warrior who had first addressed me led me toward the center of the settlement, where a circular clearing opened beneath a break in the canopy. Unlike Silverfang's ceremonial grounds, there were no carved emblems or dominance markers here. Instead, a large stone slab stood at the clearing's center, etched with faint lunar symbols worn smooth by time. An older woman stood beside it. Her posture was upright, her silver-streaked hair braided neatly down her back. The power radiating from her was not aggressive, yet it was unmistakable. When her eyes settled on me, they did not widen in shock. They softened in recognition. "You felt it," she said calmly to the warrior beside me. He nodded, as did the Northern Watch. Her gaze shifted to the mark at my collarbone. Though it was no longer glowing brightly, the symbol remained visible, faintly silver against my skin. "It has been 3 generations," she said quietly. We wondered if the line had ended. I absorbed her words carefully. "What line?" She stepped closer, not invading my space, but close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of age and experience rather than weakness. "The blood-marked are not created by ceremony," she explained. "They are born into specific bloodlines that trace back to the earliest guardians of the Moon's covenant. Long before structured packs and territorial claims, there were wolves entrusted with maintaining balance when alpha rule grew corrupt or unstable." Her explanation did not feel mythical in the exaggerated sense. It felt historical and practical. "Silverfang's elders likely remember fragments of it," she continued. "But most modern packs treat it as legend because it challenges centralized authority." The meaning settled slowly. "You're saying the mark is not a blessing of submission," I said. "No," she replied. It is a mark of oversight. The word carried weight. The tall warrior remained silent, but I could sense the quiet respect directed toward the older woman. She was not addressed as Alpha, yet her authority within the space was unquestioned. "You were rejected publicly," she said, studying my expression. "The blood moon often responds to moments of imbalance. Rejection alone would not trigger it. But injustice under a blood moon can." My thoughts returned briefly to Kale's declaration, to the way the elders had supported his decision without examining the bond fully, to how quickly exile had followed awakening. "You felt the surge last night," she said gently. "So did we. That is why our scouts positioned themselves along the outer forest at dawn. We knew Silverfong would not keep you." There was no mockery in her tone, only certainty. A quiet understanding began forming inside me. My exile had not been random misfortune. It had been the event required to push the mark into visibility. "What happens now?" I asked. The older woman gestured toward the stone slab in the center of the clearing. "Now you learn what it means to carry that symbol." She explained that the mark was dormant until activated by both lineage and circumstance. Training was necessary, not to increase power recklessly, but to understand its boundaries. The blood-marked were not rulers in the traditional sense. They did not seize territories or claim mates through force. They acted as correctives when leadership destabilized the natural order. "You will not answer to me as an alpha," she clarified. "But you will learn discipline here. Strength without control becomes the very imbalance the mark exists to prevent." The statement resonated. For the first time since leaving Silverfong, I did not feel like a displaced member searching for belonging. I felt positioned, placed exactly where unfolding events required me to be. As evening approached, the pack dispersed to their duties, leaving me standing near the stone slab with the older woman and the tall warrior. She introduced herself simply as Mara, keeper of their historical records and guardian of lunar rites. Titles here were functional, not ornamental. "Rest tonight," Mara said. "Tomorrow we test the mark's response." The tall warrior met my gaze briefly before turning to leave. "You are not alone in this," he added, his tone steady. When darkness settled over the settlement and the moon rose pale rather than crimson, I lay awake inside a modest wooden structure offered to me. The mark at my collarbone pulsed once, faint and steady, as if acknowledging its new surroundings. Silverfong had rejected me as weak. Yet here no one questioned whether I belonged. And for the first time I began to understand that my story had never been about becoming someone's Luna. It was about becoming something far more difficult to ignore. Chapter 6. The Test of the Mark. Morning came quietly in the hidden settlement. There were no ceremonial drums or loud announcements to signal the start of the day. Wolves rose with the light, moving with quiet purpose through tasks that appeared coordinated without visible command. The absence of rigid dominance displays was still unfamiliar to me, but it did not feel disorganized. It felt balanced. Mara was already waiting near the central stone slab when I stepped into the clearing. The tall warrior from the day before stood nearby, along with several others positioned at a respectful distance. No one crowded the space. No one whispered. Their attention was steady but not intrusive. "You felt it respond last night," Mara said calmly, gesturing toward my collarbone. I nodded. The pulse had been faint, almost like a second heartbeat beneath my skin. "The mark reacts to shifts in balance," she continued. "Today we determine whether you can sense those shifts consciously." She instructed me to stand at the center of the clearing, directly before the stone etched with lunar symbols. The carvings were subtle, worn by years of exposure, but as I stepped closer, I sensed a quiet resonance beneath them, something that aligned with the warmth under my skin. "Close your eyes," she said. "Do not reach for power. Simply observe." I followed her instruction. At first, there was only the sound of wind brushing through leaves and the distant movement of wolves working beyond the clearing. Then gradually I became aware of something deeper, an undercurrent in the air. It was not a scent or a sound, but a pattern like tension lines woven through space. My wolf stirred, alert but not aggressive. "What do you feel?" Mara asked. "Movement," I replied slowly. "Not physical. Something beneath it. Focus on it." The mark warmed in response. The sensation spread from my collarbone down my spine, not painful but expanding. The undercurrent became clearer. I could distinguish individual threads within it, some steady, some strained. Then one strand pulsed sharply. My eyes opened instinctively. "North edge," I said before fully understanding why. "Something is wrong." Several wolves exchanged quick glances, but no one moved impulsively. The tall warrior stepped forward slightly, clearly prepared to respond if instructed. Mara did not look surprised. She closed her eyes briefly as if confirming the shift herself. "A patrol unit encountered tension along the outer ridge at dawn," she said. Minor but unsettled. I had not seen that patrol. No one had mentioned it. Yet I had felt it. The realization settled heavily and clearly. The mark was not a symbol of brute strength. It was a conduit for awareness. Mara stepped closer, studying my expression carefully. "The blood-marked do not lead through dominance displays," she explained. "They sense imbalance before it fractures into conflict. They intervene with precision." The tall warrior's voice entered calmly. "Silverfong likely felt the surge last night but could not interpret it. Power without understanding often appears threatening." His words were not defensive of Kale, merely factual. I lowered my gaze briefly, not in submission but in thought. If the mark responded to imbalance, then my rejection under the blood moon had not simply been personal humiliation. It had represented something broader, an alpha decision misaligned with the covenant older than pack politics. "Can they feel me?" I asked quietly. "Some may," Mara replied. "Particularly the one who rejected you. A broken mate bond rarely disappears cleanly." The reminder of Kale did not cause the same sharp pain it once would have. Instead, it stirred a more complicated awareness. If he sensed the shift but did not understand it, uncertainty would follow. And uncertainty in an alpha could ripple through an entire pack. Mara motioned for me to remain in place. "We will test the mark again," she said. "Not to expand it, but to strengthen your control." She instructed 2 wolves to step into the clearing and create a controlled surge of dominance energy, not directed at me aggressively but enough to disturb the balance slightly. As they did, I felt the change immediately. The threads in the air tightened. The mark flared, brighter this time. Instinctively I reached, not outward in force but inward in focus. Instead of pushing back against the surge, I stabilized my breathing and centered my awareness on the pattern itself. Gradually the tension eased. The 2 wolves relaxed without conscious effort, their dominance receding into equilibrium. When the glow at my collarbone dimmed again, the clearing was quiet. No one applauded. No dramatic declarations followed. Mara simply nodded once. "Control," she said. "That is the difference between chaos and correction." The tall warrior regarded me with a new steadiness. Not admiration. Recognition. "You are adjusting quickly," he observed. "I don't feel stronger," I admitted. "You are not meant to feel stronger," Mara replied. "You are meant to feel clearer." The distinction mattered. As the training session ended, I became aware of a subtle pull at the edge of my perception, familiar, distant, but persistent. It did not originate from within this settlement. It came from the direction of Silverfong territory. The mate bond Kale had attempted to sever had not disappeared entirely. It had shifted into something quieter but still present, like a line stretched across distance. And though I stood surrounded by wolves who understood the mark better than I did, I realized something unavoidable. Silverfong had rejected me. But Silverfong had not finished with me. And soon the imbalance there would demand correction. Chapter 7. The Fracture. The first time I felt the shift, I dismissed it as memory. The second time I knew it was not. It began as a faint disturbance beneath the surface of my awareness, like tension humming through distant earth. Subtle, uneven, and not loud enough to demand action, but persistent enough to refuse ignorance. Silverfong. I did not need to name it aloud. The mark beneath my collarbone warmed in quiet confirmation. Threads of imbalance stretched in that direction. Not violent, not catastrophic, but tightening. For days I had trained to distinguish emotion from structural instability. Wolves argued everywhere. Alphas made flawed decisions. Packs adjusted and moved on. But this felt different. This felt like pressure building behind controlled walls. Rowan noticed the shift in me before I spoke of it. I had grown quieter during patrols, my focus slipping inward at unexpected moments. "You're feeling them," he said one evening as the sun dipped low over the ridge. "Yes." "Your former pack?" I did not flinch at the word former. "Yes." We stood at the edge of the settlement overlooking the valley below. The air was cool, steady, untroubled here. Silverfong was not. "It's not chaos," I said slowly. "It's tightening. Like a cord pulled too far." Rowan did not ask if I intended to go because he knew. Later that night the sensation sharpened. I woke before dawn, breath even but alert. The threads I had learned to sense were no longer distant vibrations. They pulsed sharply, brief surges of dominance, quick reactions, correction layered upon correction. Overcompensation. Kale was not losing control. He was reinforcing it. And reinforcement used too frequently fractures morale. I rose quietly and stepped outside. The moon hung pale overhead, no longer crimson but observant. Mara approached without surprise. She always seemed to sense shifts in others before they voiced them. "It has accelerated," she said gently. "Yes." "And you feel compelled?" I did not answer immediately. Compulsion would imply emotion. This was something else. "I feel responsible," I said instead. "You were rejected," she reminded me. "Silverfong is not your burden." "No," I agreed. "But imbalance is." She studied me carefully, searching for traces of unresolved attachment. "You must ask yourself," she said after a moment, "whether you return because of duty or because of unfinished pain." The question landed cleanly. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the mate bond, thin and altered, surface in awareness. There was no ache, no longing, no bitterness, only sensitivity. "If I were returning for him," I said quietly, "the mark would not be this calm." Mara nodded once. "Then go," she said. "But understand this. Correction is rarely welcomed." "I don't expect welcome." Just before dawn, Rowan joined me at the boundary of our territory. "You will not go alone," he said simply. "This is not a confrontation," I replied. "It is still risk." We did not speak further. The forest between territories felt heavier than it had days before. Every step forward carried the faint echo of memory. The night of rejection, the humiliation beneath the blood moon, the moment my knees had struck cold earth. I did not push the memory away. I let it surface. Let it lose its sting. Because walking back into Silverfong territory required clarity, not denial. The boundary stones came into view just as the first light of morning cut across the sky. I stopped several paces before crossing. For the briefest moment, hesitation flickered. Not fear. Not weakness. But awareness. This land had once defined me. My rank. My place. My worth. I inhaled slowly. Then stepped forward. The shift was immediate. The threads sharpened into sensation. Raised voices carried faintly through the trees. Dominance surged and receded in quick pulses, like waves hitting stone too frequently. 2 patrol wolves spotted me first. Recognition spread across their expressions like shock beneath discipline. "She crossed the boundary," one murmured. "She was exiled. She shouldn't be here." Their scent carried tension. confusion layered with instinctive hierarchy awareness. I did not project dominance in return. I did not need to. The mark warmed gently, stabilizing the air around us. "I'm not here to challenge," I said calmly. That alone unsettled them more than aggression would have. More wolves emerged from between the trees. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Some looked wary. Some looked uncertain. A few looked relieved in ways they did not understand. The instability was not imaginary. It was shared. "You shouldn't have come back," one of the younger warriors said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You feel it too," I replied. He did not answer. The air shifted. Dominance rolled outward from deeper within the territory, stronger, heavier, unmistakable. Alpha Kale. The wolves around me straightened instinctively. Tension snapped into formation. He emerged from between the trees with controlled authority, black uniform catching early light, posture rigid but composed. His gaze locked onto me instantly. No surprise. He had felt me the moment I crossed. "You were ordered to leave," he said evenly. And I did. His dominance pressed outward, testing. I did not push back. I allowed it to wash over me, tracing its edges. Precision forced too tightly. The pack behind him reacted in small, nearly invisible ways. Stiffened shoulders, lowered eyes, held breath. He felt their reactions, which made him project further. "There," I said softly. His gaze sharpened. "You see threat where there is none," I continued. "Your wolves mirror you." A faint murmur spread behind him. "You speak boldly for someone who holds no rank here," he replied. "I hold no rank," I agreed. "But I hold awareness." The mark pulsed once, steady, not aggressive. He stepped closer. The pack tensed, and the silence between us became charged enough to fracture. "You think Silverfong is failing?" he asked. "I think it is tightening." His jaw tightened. Tightening prevents fracture. Over-tightening causes it. A younger wolf behind him shifted uncertainly. The imbalance peaked. The silence stretched between us, heavy, fragile, and one breath away from breaking. Chapter 8. Alignment. The clearing remained silent long after my words settled into the air. No wolf moved. Even the wind seemed to pause between the trees, as if waiting to see whether this moment would fracture further or finally steady itself. Alpha Kale stood only a few paces away from me, his posture rigid but controlled. The wolves behind him formed a half-circle instinctively, their loyalty visible in their stance. They were not preparing for battle. They were bracing for direction. His dominance rolled outward in a measured wave. It was not explosive or violent. It was structure. The kind that had held Silverfong together for years. And yet, beneath that projection, the mark at my collarbone detected something else. A tension threaded through his authority like a hairline crack beneath polished stone. I did not resist his dominance. I let it pass over me, observed it. The warmth beneath my skin responded softly, mapping the imbalance without aggression. The mark did not flare this time. It did not challenge him. It evaluated. "You crossed my boundary," Kale said evenly. "I did. You were ordered to leave." I left. The pack watched, breath held between authority and uncertainty. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why return?" "Because you felt it too. Because your pack is unraveling at the edges. Because dominance used as a shield becomes a blade." But I did not say those things aloud. "Because your territory is unsettled," I replied instead. "And when a pack unsettles, the source is rarely at its edges." A faint ripple moved through the warriors behind him. Subtle, controlled but real. Kale did not look back at them. "You presume to diagnose my leadership?" he asked. "I don't presume," I said quietly. "I feel it." The mate bond between us pulsed faintly. Not with longing, not with ache, but with awareness. The bond he had tried to sever beneath the blood moon had not vanished completely. It had thinned into something neutral, a thread of structural sensitivity. Through it, the mark sensed the strain coiled beneath his dominance. He stepped closer. The pack's attention tightened. "You were rejected," he said. "That is personal. This isn't." The distinction landed between us like a boundary stone. His dominance pressed outward again, firmer now, instinctively defensive. A silent reminder to his wolves that he remained alpha. The younger ones stiffened. The elders straightened. And the imbalance sharpened. "There," I said softly. His gaze flickered. "You are tightening control when control is not what they lack." A beat of silence followed. "They lack certainty," I continued. "And certainty does not come from pressure." For the first time since I had stepped back onto Silverfong territory, something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger. Recognition. "You speak as if you understand alpha burden," he said. "I understand structure." The mark warmed in agreement. "You increased patrol rotations." He did not respond, but a few warriors exchanged quick glances. "You corrected minor disputes publicly." Silence. "You projected dominance in response to unrest." His jaw tightened slightly. "That is leadership," he said. "It is containment," I replied. The word lingered. Containment. Strong, necessary at times, but unsustainable when overused. The air in the clearing thickened with thought rather than aggression. Kale inhaled slowly, recalibrating. The surge of dominance he had been holding began to settle, not collapsing but refining. The pack responded immediately. Shoulders lowered. Postures eased. The subtle thread of tension that had been humming beneath the surface softened by degrees. Silverfong was not weak. It had simply mirrored its alpha's uncertainty. "You are not weak," he said suddenly. The statement was quiet. Not for the pack. For me. I met his gaze steadily. I never was. The truth carried no bitterness. Just clarity. His expression shifted again, this time unmistakably. The cold dismissal that had once defined his view of me had dissolved. In its place stood something heavier. Understanding. "You would have stood beside me," he said after a pause. "If I had accepted the bond." "Yes." "And you would have strengthened Silverfong." "Yes." The mate bond trembled faintly. "But I was never meant to stand beneath you," I added. The correction was small, but absolute. A faint flicker crossed his expression, the awareness of a miscalculation made not in weakness but in pride. Strength is not always loud. He knew that now. And he knew, too, that he had mistaken silence for fragility. Around us, the wolves watched their alpha closely and waiting. Kale turned slightly, not breaking eye contact with me entirely, but addressing his pack without theatrics. "Return patrol rotations to standard," he said evenly. A few warriors nodded immediately. Disputes are to be resolved privately unless they threaten cohesion. The elders exchanged quiet looks of approval. "And unnecessary dominance projection ends now." That last statement carried weight. It was not weakness. It was adjustment. The kind that separates true leadership from fragile control. The tension in the clearing eased almost completely. The mark beneath my skin cooled from warm awareness into steady equilibrium. Balance restored. Not because he yielded, but because he recalibrated. "You will leave again," Kale said quietly, turning back to me. "Yes. You do not belong within my hierarchy." "No." The word carried no resentment, only truth. Silverfong was his responsibility. The mark did not belong to one pack. It belonged to imbalance itself. For a long moment neither of us moved. "You were never ordinary," he said at last. "No," I agreed gently. "And I failed to see it." It was not spoken as an apology, but it was admission. The mate bond between us thinned further, its remaining thread loosening like mist dissolving at dawn. What once carried expectation now carried neutrality. He would not call me back. He would not attempt to reclaim what had passed. And I would not linger to see whether regret grew in his silence. He had rejected more than a mate beneath the blood moon. He had rejected balance. But leadership is not defined by never misjudging. It is defined by correcting when misjudgment is revealed. And he had done that. I stepped backward slowly toward the boundary stones. The pack parted instinctively, not in fear, but in recognition of something they did not have language for. As I turned, I felt no ache, no unfinished longing, no need for vindication, only a widening sense of direction. The forest beyond Silverfong stretched open beneath a pale sky. The blood moon was gone now, its crimson witness replaced by quiet daylight. The mark pulsed once, not in urgency, not in warning, but in affirmation. Behind me, Silverfong resumed its rhythm. Warriors dispersed. Elders conferred. Life continued. Kale remained standing where I had left him. Not reaching. Not retreating. Simply watching. And in that stillness he understood something that would never be spoken aloud before his wolves. Some strength is not meant to be claimed. It is meant to be recognized. I crossed the boundary stones. Not exiled. Not rejected. But positioned. The mate bond dissolved completely then, not torn, not broken, but released. The air felt lighter without it. Lonelier perhaps, but clearer. I had once believed my fate was to stand beside an alpha, to become Luna, to anchor my identity to partnership. But the moon had chosen differently. Not dominance, not submission, but balance. And balance, I was beginning to understand, is rarely shared. The wolves who listen. Seasons shifted. The forest changed its colors twice before the mark pulsed again with intention rather than memory. This time there was no humiliation beneath a crimson sky. No circle of watching wolves. No alpha standing before me with judgment in his voice. Only wind. Only distance. And the quiet hum of imbalance stirring somewhere far beyond the trees. I stood at the edge of a ridge overlooking land that did not belong to Silverfong, or to any pack I had ever known. Below, smoke rose faintly from a settlement still too distant to see clearly. The tension I sensed there was subtle, woven through its foundation like a thread pulled too tight. The mark warmed. Not urgently, not violently, but steadily. Once I would have waited to be chosen. Once I would have believed my strength required recognition. Now I understood something different. Balance does not ask permission. It moves where it is needed. Some alphas lead through dominance. Some lead through fear. Some learn through fracture. And once in a generation the moon chooses one who does not lead at all, but steadies. I did not belong to a single territory anymore. I did not belong to a mate bond. I did not belong to hierarchy. I belonged to the space between power and collapse. The wind shifted. Somewhere below, voices would rise in disagreement before nightfall. A decision would be made too quickly. A correction would be needed. And when that moment came, I would move. Not to rule. Not to claim. But to remind. The moon does not always crown a Luna. Sometimes it sends a witness. The mark pulsed once more, calm, certain. And I stepped forward. And so, some bonds are meant to bind. Some are meant to break. And some are meant to reveal who you are always becoming. She was rejected beneath the blood moon. She was called weak. But the moon did not choose her to kneel. It chose her to steady what others could not. Not dominance. Not submission. But balance. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy mature, powerful paranormal stories like this, stay with me. There are more waiting beneath the next moon.